I have spent a decent amount of my life reading some of the same books that you have. And I, I talk about race and racism and the ways in which it affects people's lives every day, right? So I don't consider myself a novice. And often when I go to trainings or classes, I'm always like, yeah, like not in an arrogant way, but like it's not often that I'm like, whoa, wait, I haven't really thought about that before. But in terms of like learning new history and stuff, that doesn't happen very often for me. So I did not expect to learn a lot of new information. I expected to learn new insights, but the delight for me was that I learned both. And I was taking notes way more than I thought I would be, and like looking up the references that you shared and like sharing those references with other folks that I think are pretty informed and being like, did you know this? Like, I didn't know this. And that was cool. That was super cool. But what was maybe even cooler for me was the capacity to synthesize this information in a new way. And I think I talked about this during one of the classes, but like I know this information sort of in columns, right? In discrete columns, but the way that we talked about it was in rows, and that was new for me. And it helped me see some of the connections. And it was in those connections where the holy shit, how did we get here part really came through, so yeah, I find myself thinking about these connections like random, while I'm driving down the street or, making breakfast or something, and thinking about like, oh, right. And what else that probably impacted was, and like the horizontal connections are still mapping in my brain.
Yes.
So I think personally, what it's done for me is a thing that we talked about a lot in the class was I have new ways to talk about the impacts of racism and the way forward with other people. Struggled with I get too mad, and then I lose my ability to convince or to be productive in a conversation, and I get too mad. And so
that's
one
what
of
I
the
like to call the emotional hijack of conversations of race.
yeah, totally. And it's really hard to not get really mad, right? So I think in the past when people would say something, I would be like, are you kidding? Like, how can you possibly think that? And now I feel like I'm through your class and through some other efforts in my life, right? Like I spend a lot of time on this, but like your class was really helpful in my efforts to build sort of the capacity and a framework within which to put these things so that I can say, like, instead of like, how can you think this? Or how can you say that? I can say in my head, like, I know how you can think this, and I know how you can say this. And I still hate it and it still pisses me off, but like, I know how, I guess I have a better understanding of, as you talk about in your class, how did we get here, which makes me less
Confused or conflicted.
Yeah. And it makes me less blamey. That's not, you know what I mean?
I get it. I get it. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. And if I can remove my feelings of blame, I can actually interact with the person a little bit better.
That's beautiful.
yeah, it's been really helpful. I've had some conversations lately where I'm like, oh, it's so nice to be able to both have those feelings, but not but have an additional way in which to interact with the conversation. You know, it's not just my anger and my pain.
Yeah.
It's I've got other stuff now too. But what I really appreciated about your class is that you were giving. Nobody's being asked to give and give anything away. We're all receiving things. We're receiving this information, this history, this opportunity to have a conversation. And nobody's being like told that they have to change, or that they have to be a different person, or they have to feel differently about their grandmother.
Oh,
or
no.
You know, like and I think you set the tone for that really nicely. And you reminded us periodically, and when every once in a while when you did, I could feel my own relief, and I'm like, oh dude, there's my like white person reflex of like, you would say like, and we're gonna get to some strategies at the end, and I'd be like, oh phew, you know. Then I'm like, oh, I'm doing it myself, you know. Right, because I think there's always this like, but what should I do, you know. And I think you did a nice job of being like, we'll get to some strategies. First, we need a foundation, and then we'll get to some strategies, you know.
Yeah. No, and it's crazy because like at that, from all people, like it is black or white, there is a general angst of getting to strategies and starting to solve the problem.
Yeah.
And it's like, look, it took us at a minimum, we looked at 600 years. Right? So it took us 600 years to get here. In 4 weeks, we're not going to start like chopping at the root of this tree and knocking it down. Like, just chill on the strategy for a second. You know, let's know, because we don't know enough.
Yeah.
And we're still learning. And then the strategies that we do implement, if we implement strategies and we're bereft of information, of constructive information, we're going to do more harm than good. And that's what's going on out here. Like people are and it's not like people are doing it intentionally, but it's just like you just don't have enough context of what you're doing. And so you're kind of spouting the same talking points, or it's elevating the very values that put us in this situation. So if we don't understand like how to disassociate ourselves from the values of white supremacy, of racism, of you know, exclusion, of colorism, all those things, and the certain laws that are put out there, and the ways that the laws interact with certain people, you know, and it's just like, whoa, hold on, let's just take a few steps back and let's just learn. Let's just learn together. Let's just learn and unpack, because like you said, it's a lot of this stuff is very emotional, and we know what we feel, but we don't always know why. And we don't know how to unpack it. And so I kind of see this more like a therapy, you know, like group therapy.
It totally is.
Yeah,
absolutely. So I took the course because I wanted to, I share Emmanuel's question about how did we get here? I took the class because I want to know, how did we get here? I took the class because I wanted to learn more about the history, and I learned so much more than just the history. I learned a framework of connecting events through history, and the pathways on which that has taken us, that gives me a context for understanding where we are right now, especially in relation to racism and white supremacy. And it's given me new tools for processing day-to-day encounters, but also how I want to engage with the process of fighting racism and white supremacy in my life and in my world. Take the class, you won't regret it. It was wonderful. Thank you, Emmanuel.